Want to Tempo Us podcast team meeting, episode number 1. In 2022, Chloe was first getting into softball, and her first softball hero was Montana Fouts, number 14. I think she was like a lot of young softball players then. She fell in love with Alabama softball because of Montana Fouts. So that spring in 2022, we took a trip to Tuscaloosa to watch Alabama play at Rhodes Stadium. What happened that weekend left a bigger impression on me than just the softball. While standing in line to go to the first game, we had brickyard seats in the outfield. A gentleman introduced himself as Cat Grill's father. Cat Grill played right field for Alabama softball. He asked where we were sitting. We told him in the outfield. Then he offered us his season tickets behind home plate because he was sitting in the parent section. I thought, Southern hospitality at its finest. We graciously accepted and went to the game. He told us also where the players would be after the game to sign autographs, so we went there. It was a great experience for Chloe. She got to meet almost all of the players, including Montana Fouts. He then also recommended a restaurant for us to go to lunch the next day, so we went there. And while we're eating, the manager walked over and asked Chloe if she would like to meet Patrick Murphy, the head coach of Alabama softball. Needless to say, Chloe was thrilled, excited. Coach Murphy could not have been more gracious. He came over, introduced himself, signed an autograph for her, and we left thinking, man, the people in Alabama are different. And Southern hospitality at its finest is what I thought. And for 4 years, that's what I believed. Then we attended the Alabama softball clinic yesterday, and I realized it wasn't just Southern hospitality. It was culture. Let me explain. When we arrived at the clinic, everything looked normal. Check in, the normal process. Everybody was checking in. Parents were standing around. Athletes were warming up. The usual. But then about 15 minutes before the start of the camp, I realized something a little different had happened. Something strange. The 35 athletes that were signed up for the camp had voluntarily packed themselves into 2 dugouts. Now, this isn't at the Alabama facility. This is in Scenic City at Connect Camp. So there's multiple fields at the venue. The dugouts aren't that big. 35 people shoved into those 2 dugouts were pretty tightly packed. There was very little talking going on. It was visible, the nerves, and I'd say the tension was pretty high. And honestly, I thought the camp might be a dud. But I couldn't have been more wrong. 4 hours later, I had watched one of the best culture-building experiences that I've witnessed since Chloe's been playing softball. Not because of the softball instruction. The softball instruction, it was excellent. But that's not what separated it. What separated it was how intentionally Alabama teaches culture. Coach Patrick Murphy opened the camp with one simple statement. Our job is to give you the best 4-hour clinic you've ever attended. Then they went to work. Not just teaching softball, but teaching confidence, teaching communication, teaching relationships, teaching accountability, teaching gratitude, teaching competition, teaching culture. And they did it through a series of simple activities that built on one another throughout the day. By the end of the camp, those nervous athletes sitting silently in the dugout had become something different. Confident, competitive, connected, comfortable with being uncomfortable, invested in each other. The softball was important, but the culture was transformational. And that's the lesson. Great cultures don't happen by accident. They are intentionally designed. Every drill, every conversation, every interaction, every expectation. Culture isn't the quote on the wall. It's not what you put on your wall. Culture is what people consistently experience. Culture is what drives behaviors in your organization or team. So let's take a deeper look at how they did it. Phase 1 was confidence building. The first thing Coach Murphy taught wasn't softball. It was the confidence to make a great first impression. He started with something as simple as a handshake. 8 steps to a great handshake. Make eye contact. Be first. Use their name if you know it. And if you don't, introduce yourself, first and last name. Close the space. 3 pumps on the handshake. No more. Don't grab with 2 hands. Then separate, create space to start a conversation. As a football coach, I immediately knew it wasn't just about the handshakes. It wasn't about teaching young athletes. It was about teaching those young athletes how to present themselves, how to make a great first impression, how to walk into a room with confidence. Coach Murphy also shared a story about his team when a Nike executive had visited Rhodes Stadium. I guess Coach wasn't there, and then he heard that the Nike executive was there in their Nike school. Obviously, look at the swoosh that I'm actually wearing right now. He took off and ran over to the stadium. By the time he got there, his entire team had already introduced themselves to the Nike executive. Later, the Nike exec would send to Coach Murphy an email that explained he had a new favorite team, the Alabama softball team, because each one of them had come over and introduced himself, shook his hand, and took an interest. And he had suddenly become more than just they were a Nike school. They were people who he was invested in. After the handshake lesson, there was a second lesson. Don't start with Instead, embrace the pause. So what is that? It's the idea of thinking before you speak, presenting yourself with confidence. The athletes introduced themselves to the group, and they shared one fact about who they were. A little bit later on, they expanded upon that, where they gave short presentations, 30 seconds of length. As I listened to several of them give their talks, what I realized was not a single one started their talk with They were expanding upon that lesson of confidence and how to present yourself. What stood out to me wasn't the exercise, it was the results that were there. So the culture was delivering behaviors, which was delivering a result. Just minutes earlier, before this camp had started, these athletes barely wanted to speak when they were standing in a dugout by themselves. Now they were standing in front of their peers, communicating with confidence. That wasn't an accident. That was intentional. Confidence was being built. Phase number 2 of the day was connection. The next phase was based purely on relationships. Coach Murphy and his staff, hey, let me give a quick shout out to Ryan I. Murray and Ali Shipman, who were the 2 staff members that were there with him. They were absolutely awesome. But Coach Murphy and his staff understood something many leaders miss. You cannot build culture without connection. One of the most powerful exercises that they did was based upon the idea of power of affirmation. It's called props and own it's. Athletes at the camp, and this is something that Alabama does at the end of all of their practices, but athletes and coaches at the camp publicly affirmed one another, showing the power of affirmation. Coach Murphy used a phrase that I guarantee I will steal and use. Give people their flowers while they're still alive. Think about that. How often do we wait until people are gone to tell them what they meant to us? Or they're leaving. When they're leaving, you tell them how much they meant to you. How often do we assume people know that they're appreciated? At Alabama and Alabama softball, that appreciation is practiced. It is part of their practice routine. It's not assumed. Then came a simple walk and talk exercise. It honestly reminded me of 2020 during COVID, whenever Chloe and I would walk around the neighborhood in Pennsylvania when we were in Lock Haven and talk about a lot of different topics. What they asked the campers to do was the athletes paired up and they discussed topics. I think some of those topics were given to them to talk about while they walked around the field. Again, it was simple, but it was intentional. It is difficult to authentically encourage people or give positive affirmation when you don't know the people. You witnessed in the time that they were asked a couple athletes if they wanted to step forward. Each person that stepped forward knew something about the person that they publicly affirmed. So you have to build those relationships. And you can't build those relationships without trust. And you can't build trust without interaction. Relationships don't happen accidentally. They're built. The confidence developed in the first phase was now becoming the connection in the second phase. Now, phase 3, then came the softball. They did some throwing drills. It was followed up with throwing competitions. When they did the competitions, a challenge was issued by Coach Murphy. Get outside of your comfort zone. You don't grow within your comfort zone. There were challenges. There was some pressure. And there was opportunities to compete. And something interesting happened at this time. The same athletes who had sat nervously before the camp in the dugouts were now cheering, laughing, competing, encouraging each other. Now, the softball drills mattered, but the real lesson was bigger. Competition exposes people. Competition reveals people. And competition accelerates growth. As coaches, we often focus on the small details of skill development. But that competition is what accelerates that growth. Coach Murphy was using competition to develop confidence, resilience, and ownership. The competition wasn't the culture, but the competition revealed the culture. It revealed a perspective. So phase 4 was perspective. This may have been my favorite part of the entire day. Earlier in the clinic, or right at the very start of the clinic, Coach Murphy introduced his staff. And when he introduced Allie Shipman, who's a former player for him, and helping with the clinic on the day, she mentioned a phrase, attitude of gratitude. It's a great line. I use it often. In fact, every time that I've taken a head coaching job, one of the first challenges I give to our team is to show an attitude of gratitude. I ask them to go and thank a mentor, to call someone, have a conversation with them, somebody that's helped them get to that seat that they're sitting in on that day. Very few people who play high school football get the opportunity to go and play at the college level. And if you got there, then you have some great people in your corner. So it's important that you recognize that and have the humility to thank them. So I challenge them to do it. When I do that, I also say, if you can't think of somebody to thank right now, what I want you to do is go to Walmart, buy a thank you card, write a note to your mom, put it in the mail, and send it to her. It'll take 3 days to get there, but it'll have a lifetime of impact. I also warn them that what they don't want to do is text mom a big thank you letter right now, because she's probably going to follow up the text with what happened and what do you want. So I want you to be intentional with the process of sending an actual letter through snail mail. But after Allie had mentioned that idea of attitude of gratitude, during the camp, you got to see it come to fruition. I watched the behavior happen. When they got to the hitting session, one group was hitting BP. The other group was off to the side, and they wrote thank you letters. Not because they had to thank someone, but because they were encouraged to recognize the people who had helped them get there on that day. Parents, coaches, mentors, teammates, people who had invested intentionally in them. The exercise hit me because gratitude creates a perspective. Perspective creates humility. It's bigger than just you. A lot of organizations will talk about gratitude, but Alabama built it into the exercise. They built it into the experience of the day. That's a huge difference. Now, the real lesson that I took from the day, I reflected on as we drove home, a 7.5-hour drive home. To give you a little look into the last 10 days in the Tanner household. We went to Tennessee to go to a Tennessee softball camp. We drove back. We went to Tennessee for a tournament. When we got back, we had to drive to Columbus for a softball doubleheader, and then got up the next day and drove to Dalton, Georgia for the Scenic City camps and the Alabama camp that I've been talking about. So I've been doing a lot of time driving. But this drive home, I really had time to reflect upon what I'd witnessed at the camp. And I realized the genius wasn't any individual activity. The genius in the day was the sequence. The activities were not random. They were all connected in some way. Confidence led to communication. Communication led to relationships. Relationships led to affirmation. The affirmation led to trust. Trust would lead to owning it. And trust led to competition. That competition led to growth. And 4 hours later, those weren't the same athletes that were huddled in the dugout. That's culture by design. That's what leadership is. It is about intentional development. So yes, softball skills were taught. But more importantly, the process taught culture. And whether you're coaching football, softball, leading a business, raising children, or building a team, the lesson is the same. Culture doesn't happen because you talk about it. Culture happens because people experience it. Every single interaction teaches. Every expectation teaches. Every conversation teaches. The question is, what are you teaching? Because culture is always being built. The only question is whether you're building it intentionally or accidentally. Thank you for being a part of the 1-2 Tempo Us community. If today's episode brought you value, subscribe so you don't miss future messages. If you know a coach, parent, player, teammate, leader, or competitor who would benefit from this message, share it with them. For additional resources, leadership content, and upcoming projects, visit 12tempous.com. And if there's a question, challenge, or topic you'd like us to discuss in a future episode, we'd love to hear from you. Remember, the game of life is played every day. Focus on what you can influence. Compete relentlessly. Raise the standard. Develop people. Until next time, 1-2 Tempo Us.